Good morning, everybody. My name is Elio De Tullio, as you probably remember. This is the last meeting of IP for SMEs. That is a European project funded by UIPO, led by ISME, the International Network of Small and Medium-Sized Enterprises, and with the support of the Tullian Partners, that is our company. So we are very happy today to have Lia Speser. She's a very important, well-known expert in the field of technology transfer. And we will listen to Lia and her experience not only in Cyprus, where she is now, but also in US for several years. So Lia is currently working in Cyprus for supporting the Research and Innovation Foundation, but she's also co-founder and former CEO of Foresight Science and Technology, and hold JD, PhD, 2 business relevant certifications. So registered technology transfer professional and new product development professional. Lia, the floor is yours. You can complement my presentation, and I hope that you all can enjoy Lia's speech. Of course, I see that also the Secretary General of ISME is connected. I think he will intervene at the end of the webinar. But of course, Giovanni, if you like to jump in, please let us know.
So good day, everybody. I'm going to speak wearing my Foresight Science and Technology hat, because if I speak wearing a foundation hat, I need to get everything approved by the Director General, which I won't be able to do this in time. So here goes. I'm going to give you some reality. I'm going to talk about IP, tech transfer, and reality. I know a good deal about this. I'm considered one of the founders of tech transfer. I've been in this field for 45 years. I wrote the basic textbook. There's my textbook. And subsequently, I wrote a book targeting SMEs with a group of Italians who I became friends with, called Open Innovation Essentials for Small and Mid-Sized Companies. And one of the chapters I wrote was chapter 3, and I just want to highlight something in chapter 3 here, which points out, whoops, what did I do? Tech transfer is a mature field. It's mostly in research organizations, public institutions. There are professionals who work there. That's what the RTTP is, Registered Technology Transfer Agent. It works best if you have at least a rough idea of what you're looking for. And you have to understand that this is very immature technology, so if you don't have the right kind of business, it's a waste of time. So we're going to talk a little bit about what makes it worthwhile and when it's a waste of time. The first thing we need to think about is, which I know you've had a good deal on, is what's IP? So from a tech transfer standpoint, let's look at what IP is. IP is what falls down, if you look on the right-hand side. Oh, there we go. If you look over here on the right-hand side, I hope you can see my pointer. It says here, fixed long-term assets, and there's intangible assets, and there's none here. IP is an intangible asset. What is an asset? It's something you use to make money. So we don't care about ideas. We don't care about technology per se. Technology is important because it is either a nascent product or service. It's an asset you use to make a product or service. Very important point. From a university standpoint, tech transfer is about moving ideas, knowledge, and all these things. From a company standpoint, baloney. And the reason I have this surveyor on the other side of the balance sheet is to point out, if you cannot describe the metes and bounds of the asset, Just like when you have a piece of property, you talk about meets and bounds, that's the boundaries of it. Then it doesn't exist as an asset. So it has to, even though it's intangible, it deals with ideas, there must be a tangible description someplace of what the technology or the ideas are before it can be an intangible asset or intellectual property. So even trade secret, you have to be able to describe to say, don't disclose this. So you get that basic concept, and a very important concept. The other thing about these intangible assets is the way they are defined, they must be defined and protected and treated rather in such a manner that they can be protected in a court of law for a specific jurisdiction. That's kind of obvious by now for you, I'm sure, but it's important to come back to that. So why do they have value? What does it mean to say something has value? Why do we care about intellectual property? For me, value is very simple. Value goes back to bags of groceries. You want to eat, you don't eat, you die. So you're willing to trade so many bags of groceries for something else. The number of bags of groceries you'll trade is the value. We can convert that to money, but it comes down to this fundamental basic human needs. And when we talk about IP and tech transfer, what we're really trying to do is say, somewhere down there, there's a product or a service that will be sold and people will give up bags of groceries to buy it. And the number of bags of groceries they give up is all the money there is in the whole system, going all the way back up the supply chain to the university or research institution and the people who invented it and protected it. That's all the value there is in those bag of groceries that the customers give up. And you're just dividing it up after that. Now, the reason people will buy something is because it provides them a benefit. So we can say what creates those benefits, and that's what we call tangible features. The tangible features are what it does, how it does it, its performance, its ease of use, its quality, how it's packaged, its price. The core with understanding IP and the value of IP is we know that all that counts in a patent is the claims. Everything else is irrelevant, it has no legal force. And I say this as a former IP law professor in the US. Those claims have to translate somehow to the tangible features. They're how you create the tangible features of a product or service, and then you package it with all other things like customer support, how you deliver it, warranties, and all those other kinds of things, and that's called augmented features. But from an IP standpoint today, we're concerned about what's the core benefit I'm going to provide, and how does the IP or the intellectual asset relate to those tangible features? Because if it doesn't, it has no value. I once wrote an article that said, how do you put a value on worthless technology? Because we were dealing with the Motorola and the large patent transactions that happened in, I think it was in the 80s. And you knew there was a lot of junk in there. So what's the value of a piece of junk? And that was the question I was trying to deal with. Because if it doesn't lead to a tangible feature, who cares? Now, we know that innovation is important for companies. There's a lot of research out there. New products account for 33% of company products. Product cycles are getting shorter. There's a 400% reduction in the past 50 years. We also know that very few products succeed. Only 1 in 10 succeed commercially. Only 51% are launched on time, and so on. And companies scrap almost 1/3 of new product development projects. That means that IP has to fall in a very narrow area to have any value at all. Because if you can't get it to the market, who cares? I'm going to constantly come back to this. Who cares? We also know some things that are very important if you're going to play around with IP. You need a product innovation strategy and a technology strategy driven by the business strategy. This is all out of that same article. But there's a bunch of stuff like this that you can find in the research literature. You need top management support. You need a unique and superior product. You need a strong market orientation. Ideally, in today's world, it should have a global orientation. You got to do the front end homework to make sure you understand the voice of the customer and what you can make and do. You have to have a well-defined product or service. You have to have well-organized project teams that leverage the core capacities of the company. And you need sufficient resources to go forward. And you need a system with go, no go, or kill decision points so it gets focused. And if you don't have those things, you're likely to fail. So again, the IP is often worthless. I will give you one example to point this out. Many years ago, some of you may remember when I believe it was Google bought YouTube. It was Google bought YouTube. I had a professor friend whose son was the chief IP attorney for Google at the time. This is before Alphabet. And he went to management and said, when they were thinking about buying YouTube, he said, you know, we have to recognize that there's all this stuff about copyright violation on YouTube. So, you know, we're going to be sued and we have to be prepared for that. And you know what management, they said? They said, great, I want to be sued. We want to be sued. It's cheaper than buying the advertising to settle the lawsuits. And everybody will be logging into YouTube after we buy it to see what we're being sued about. So they'll see all the ads. IP's just a tool. So you got to treat it like a tool. And if you're going to do something with it, the company has to be capable of doing something with it, or it's a mistake to even get involved with it. So what are the two great challenges that you have if you're going to get in this game of tech transfer? Great challenge number one is you have to mature this technology because universities do basic research. Maybe they're doing some technology development. So you're picking up here and you've got to take it all the way either to a commercial product or service or mature it enough that you can license it to somebody else. And the other thing that you have to recognize, which is over here on the right-hand side, is that 70% of what companies do in R&D is designed to improve an existing product. 20% is basically the next generation of an existing product. They don't need a lot of it. For the 70%, there's no tech transfer to speak of. It's too immature. For the 20%, it's unlikely. So we're talking about only 10% of what companies do. This is long-term stuff because you have to mature it up to technology readiness levels. So as you go to mature it, we have to deal with risk. Tech transfer only has value if you can manage the risk. So there's 3 risks according to Ron Adner of the Tuck School of Management in New Hampshire at Dartmouth. Very smart guy, came out of industry, wrote 2 books, which are wonderful books, highly recommend them. And he says, this was from his book called The Wide Lens. He says, when we talk about innovation and IP and this stuff, we tend to focus on execution. What does the company have to do? But that's not enough. We also have to think about how do we get it in the market? What else has to happen out there in the market? That's that adoption chain. And who else has to innovate in order that we can use our new product or process successfully? It does no good to make the next greatest 3D printer if there's not a material that you can 3D print with. That's what he means by co-innovation. You also have to have the right value chain. Those of you who are familiar with the work of Michael Porter may recognize this as Porter's value chain. This is a value chain for a manufacturing company, a service company, or a law firm would have a different value chain. The point being, when you look at this inbound logistics operations, outbound marketing, sales, service, that's what makes the money. That's what you're making the product or the service for the company. That's your primary activities. all these support activities lose money. So this is what we call overhead. So these have to be offset by high margins on this side. Technology development, acquiring IP, fits in this loss area. That means if you can't leverage it well enough, you're going to lose money by playing this game. And in fact, one of the things I've learned from working in Europe, particularly Southern Europe, and working in places I helped Thailand, Chile, a number of what we call middle-income countries. Cyprus, I would consider a middle-income country, is unless you really know what you're doing in technology development, and you really know what you're doing down here on these primary activities, the odds of making the margins necessary to succeed are relatively small. And in the literature, we call that absorptive capacity. Do you have the ability to bring in intellectual property, new ideas, and turn them into products and services and get them out there efficiently? And if you don't have that, you lose your shirt. Whoops, went back. So how do you manage the risk? Part of it is you have to understand what's going on in your ecosystem. Here is the hallowed mountains of academia where technology comes out of and students come out of and all that stuff. And it flows down, and it ideally flows to innovative small, mid-sized companies who actually know how to develop a technology and mature it. And you need all the services in the ecosystem, the legal services like our friend Elio provides, the consulting, the accounting services. You got to have the stakeholder groups lined up. And if you're lucky, then you get to sell it to a first-tier supplier who sells it to a large company, because large companies do very little in licensing now of immature products or services. They typically work with people farther down the supply chain. It's how they manage their risk. And you also need to think about where's the money coming from and how do we ultimately get it to the end users. So there's this whole ecosystem of risk. This is the adoption chain and the co-innovation chain that Anders talking about that has to be managed. The other thing you have to have is you need the right team. Because if you don't have the right team there, you can't build anything. There's a famous saying by a US comedian, vaudeville comedian, if opportunity doesn't knock, build a door. Can't build a door unless you got the people who know how to build doors. Most companies don't have people who know how to do new product development. They know how to do what they've done all along. This is particularly true in middle-income countries, because in middle-income countries, you have family-owned businesses. Grandpa, typically it's males, grandpa and dad have done it this way forever. The kid goes off to college, comes back, son, daughter comes back. They've got great ideas, and now they have internal resistance to innovation, and they can't get the staffing that they need and the funding that they need. So you have to address the cultural and the corporate context in addition to the technology and the market and the product development context. It is possible to do professional new product development. This is a program we developed for the World Intellectual Property Organization. It's a tutorial on new product development basics. You go there and it shows you the kinds of things you have to know how to do. You got to understand what a project charter is. I'm not going to go through this in detail. You have to develop the action plan, how you're going to develop the product. You got to be customer driven. That's that voice of the customer stuff. You have to think about, do I have a competitive advantage or not? Do I have freedom to operate? What's my value chain? Is it optimized for doing this, or do I have to change my value chain? I also need to think about things like, how am I going to get in the market? Can I use a SWOT analysis to help me figure that out? What's my business model canvas and all the strategies that associate with that? So that I'm sure what I'm doing is not taking me on a tangent and not relevant to how I want to develop my business. And only after I have done all this stuff can I begin to worry about what intellectual property I have that I can leverage in licensing or acquiring know-how or consulting or hiring it through students or whatever with tech transfer. So there's a lot of front end and fuzzy front end on this that has to happen. And then you got to think about, well, if I'm bringing in technology, is this the best thing to bring in? Because I got to deal with some technology forecasting, because it's going to take me 2-3 years or 6 months, whatever, or 5 years. If I'm dealing with a drug, perhaps longer, to develop this new product or service based on this technology. Are there going to be better solutions coming out that I can foresee, and they're going to knock me out of the marketplace anyways? So I have to think about that, particularly in places like Europe, where you have recycling requirements. You have to think about life cycle risk reduction. I also have to think about how this IP fits into a new product development portfolio for my company, or is this a one-off? Nothing wrong with a one-off, but you got to know what you're doing. Otherwise, you're wasting money. Then there's all sorts of methods, like TRIZ is an example for doing the engineering better. You have to have a system that allows you to ensure your product's going. And also you got to make sure you're going to make money on it, which is the net present value. And if these capabilities to do this kind of stuff isn't in the company, it doesn't knock you out of the ballpark of playing in tech transfer or bringing new technology in or doing innovation. It just means you have to partner, but you got to be upfront about what you have and what you don't have, or you can't do anything with this. And this is regardless. And one of the questions that Elio had was institutional policy and how the universities work. You don't care about that right now. That's downstream. The core thing for you as a takeaway on all this IP stuff is, how are you going to make money on it? Do you know what you're doing or not? The negotiation, you go out and you get somebody like myself, or people who have been in this business forever, and we can help you with that. That's not the issue. The issue is, how are you going to make money on it? And thus we come to, you need money, money, money. The best things in life are free, but given to the birds and bees. Just give me money, as the Beatles used to say. So the research stuff is done with government support. Typically what's happening now is the early stage product development, the proof of concept, the prototyping. When it gets out of basic research, it goes into tech transfer, and these innovative research companies pick it up and mature it. And they're going to spend millions of dollars doing it, but they're not going to spend their own money. They're going to win government awards to do it. In some fields, software, you can do it with your own money. But I'll give you a concrete example. My company is developing a new way of controlling an insect that does $6.1 billion of damage a year in agriculture in the US alone. We've spent about $4 million developing this, all of which, God bless it, was provided by the US government. If it goes to market, to get regulatory approval will probably cost $2 million. We will know whether it's going to market in the near future, because we're in final field trials, and if the field trials are positive, what we will do is license it to an agrochemical company who will then take it through the regulatory process and make it. So it's been matured enough for them that they can go forward. They already have the lawyers that do the regulatory stuff in there. So you're playing, you come out of this government stuff, you work with the small companies that either do it under internal funding, or they go out and get venture or angel investment to help them do this if they're building a company with it. And it's only when you're ready to go to market that you need a big slug of money. If you're going to do it yourself, you're going to go to venture capital, and then you have these other problems that you come down. But the key thing to understand is, as the technology risk goes up, the investment goes, as the technology risk goes down, the investment goes up. You have to spend a lot more money because you're getting closer to the market, and there's all these other requirements that are costly. So if you don't have that kind of money, what are you going to do? And the other problem with it for SMEs, this is what we call a cap table. I assume everybody's familiar with cap tables. Can I assume that? Elio? So what a cap
But you can explain it.
Okay, what a cap table does is it basically says, here's how much money we put in the company. Every time somebody puts more money in, they want equity. What does this do to the equity as we get more money in? So if you're trying to develop something and you're doing it with private sector money, you're either doing it with your own money that you saved, you're doing it with loans, or you're doing it with investment. And if you're doing it with investment, you're cutting equity, cutting up the equity. Then now people don't like giving up equity because they feel bad about it for obvious reasons, because if it hits, they make less. And there's a whole series of greed, selfishness, and stupidity that goes along with equity investment on both sides. The only way you get money for nothing is you put government money in. So the countries that succeed in this have set up a variety of pots of money that allow small firms who are spinning this up to be supported. The EU has some programs along this line, which you're all familiar with. Almost every country has a seed or a pre-seed program or something like SBIR. That's, by the way, one of the ways I got known was I did the SBIR law in the US. I was responsible for one of the first small business programs that went government-wide, where we fund small businesses to spin up technologies. Actually was invited to the White House, met President Reagan at the signing ceremony. So now we're back to our two challenges, right? So in order to mature this, I need the right people and the right capabilities and the right value chain. I need all of that. And then I have to figure out, as I'm bringing it to market, where's the intersection? Where's this 10% going for, or maybe the 20%? Where's generation next, generation after generation next? Where's the marketplace going there? How do I know I'm going to hit that? How can I increase the likelihood of that? Now, if this sounds like really a headache, it is, because one of the reasons, if you look at the EU literature, they're always like, oh, we don't do enough in knowledge transfer. Oh, we're not successful. Our knowledge is not going anywhere. And the reason it doesn't, from my perspective as an outsider, is you're focusing on knowledge transfer, tech transfer, as opposed to how do we make innovative products and how does the knowledge coming out of our universities fit into that? And what do we need to make it possible for companies to succeed? So there's a misplaced emphasis on the university side of the equation versus the company side of the equation. That's not to say that having tech transfer offices or knowledge transfer or knowledge valorization offices is unimportant, but the really important piece is on the company side. And in the places like the US that have been successful, we spend a lot of time thinking about how do we build that company side? How do we build the robustness in the companies? So there's a kind of pull, what we call pull through, from the market and from the companies into the universities. And you'll see this emphasis accelerating even today in the US through programs like the National Science Foundation's Advanced Research for Transitioning program, which is designed to make universities what they call entrepreneurial universities, link them better with the ecosystem that they are in. So they think about, where does all this research go downstream? The sad reality is we are in a situation globally between climate change, pandemics, no water, all these kinds of things, that research for the sake of research certainly has to continue, but that's not the real problem. The problem is, what do you do with it? How do you accelerate it becoming useful? How do you build these linkages? That's one reason I'm working for RAI. And the key from the company side of this is this pyramid. When you know what the company wants, their strategy should fit with the mission and the vision and the values. And the corporate strategy translates to the business strategy that they're using in the midterm. And that drives the innovation strategy, which has to do with what technologies you're out there looking for to do knowledge transfer. And it also has to link with the new product development strategy, the portfolio, because you can't bring in something that's not useful. No, doesn't provide additional bags of groceries, think of it that way, for new product development and for the other product and for the overall strategy of the company. So intellectual property, technology, tech transfer has to fit within as a piece of the innovation strategy, which sits here in the middle of this sort of corporate pyramid of strategies. And if you think about it that way, that's how you improve the efficacy of what you're doing when you're either as an organization consulting with companies and helping companies in your areas succeed, or talking with universities who are asking you to help them. The point being in all of this that it's got to come back down to income statements. If companies can't make money off of it, then the loss, because product development is down here under operating expenses. This is when you've made it, it's out there selling, you have cost of goods sold, and you have a gross profit margin. Well, the product development comes off of that, reduces it. So this has to be downstream high enough to compensate for this down here. That's what net present value and internal rate of return and all these kinds of metric payback periods. We're all looking at what's the trade-off between these two. And if you want to effectively get companies to think about innovation and thus bringing in new technology through working with universities or partnering with them in consortiums for EU proposals or whatever, you have to understand the world these people live in. And the world they live in is a world of income statements and how those income statements work, which means you either sell things, you want to increase your sales, and you want to cut your costs. So when you bring in this capital investment, ideally downstream, it either increases the sales or cuts the costs. And if it doesn't do that, not worth doing. And if it does do that, then it shows up on the balance sheet. And the owner's equity down here, that number goes up. So I have to, in the work that I do, if I work with one of you and you're in a company or we're developing a program for your agency or something like that, we have to think about how do we increase the equity in companies? Because it's not intuitively obvious to people why IP does that, because they haven't relied upon IP in the past to do that. So now you're telling them, look, IP is great for you. It's going to make all this happen. And they're like, I don't get it. And they're right not to get it because it's outside their current experience. So it's not a failing on their part. It's a failing on our part. In the literature, I happen to be a social scientist. I also have a PhD. In the literature, we call this boundary spanning. How do you get people in two different worlds who think about different kinds of problems, use different kinds of language, to start talking and understanding each other? The key breakthrough I made when I wrote my book, I actually got from a professor of philosophy in linguistics at my son's college. His name was Gangadin. He was an Indian guy who had come to America. And he said to me with his accent, I was like, do you know what keeps me up at night? It is, how does a Muslim or a Hindu talk to a Catholic priest and they understand each other? And his solution was to bring it down in effect to bags of groceries. Everybody has human needs. If you can begin to understand the human needs, then these high religious constructs ultimately relate down to the physicality of our life. little bit different in the economic context of IP and tech transfer and economic development, but the same concept applies. We need to find the transition points where what we do in one field or area of human endeavor relates to another field of human endeavor. And that transition point is the balance sheet and the income statement. Because everybody in business knows if you don't sell, you go out of business. And if you don't make money and build equity, you might as well go get a job. Because it's not worth the headache of being an entrepreneur. So thus we have to explain to people in language they understand how that works. Look in the other direction. We need to go back into the universities. If you're on the business side, you're in a Chamber of Commerce and Economic Development Organization, something like that. We need to go back into the universities and help them understand what we need to help our companies. I will give you a concrete example here. If you are in a country where absorptive capacity is low, there's not a lot of people who understand advanced science and technology and advanced engineering. They understand the day-to-day work they do, but they're not at the frontier of it. That's what I'm talking about. This is not to knock people. We have a lot of very good companies who do a lot of very good engineering in agriculture or generic chemicals or, generic pharmaceuticals, things like that. And they're smart people and they do that first generation innovation kind of stuff where they'll reformulate a drug so you can take it nasally versus with an injection, something like that. But if you really want to push the envelope, then you have to say, okay, how do we structure a situation that allows you to bring new talent in and new capabilities? And the trick for that is to say, who's willing to move with this advanced technology to bring the know-how and the ability to manipulate it and to work with it into companies? And the answer to that is PhD graduates and postdocs. In the past, we have focused on moving IP. We don't focus on moving capabilities that include IP. It's like moving a team in a sense, the IP and some people together. We know that every university is producing too many PhDs and postdocs. There are no jobs for them. We want those people in the companies in our regions because they will bring rejuvenation to these companies and new capabilities. We need to be able to provide them some additional support and training in product development and understanding what companies really do, either through internships or other kinds of programs. I can go into, if you want to go into this, what we're trying to do here at the Research and Innovation Foundation. But the focus on what we do is, we used to say in the old days, tech transfer, technology transfer is a contact sport. What it means to be a contact sport means you got to move people around. It's just not enough to toss ideas or patents over the transom anymore. You got to get the flow of people going so that there is this human capital aspect that goes along with the intellectual capital aspect. Okay, so here are my closing thoughts, and then we've got about 15 minutes for questions. Number one, there's a famous American children's book called The Cat in the Hat by a guy named Dr. Seuss. And in it, the cat comes in, there's two kids there, they're miserable because their parents are away, they don't know what to do. And the cat says to them, it's fun to have fun, but you have to know how. One of the challenges we have in IP, tech transfer, economic development, supporting our companies, is to bring fun back in. People don't realize this is really cool stuff. It's fun. You walk around some of these university labs and you're like, oh my God, that's so cool. And I could tell you off the top of my head, 10, 20 projects that I've seen in the past month here in Cyprus that I just think are so cool. And really interesting and could make a big difference for the world. And we need to let that kind of curiosity and excitement be shared between the companies and the universities. Because the guys and the women in the university know what the women and the guys in the companies need, and vice versa. Because they don't talk to each other. A friend of mine, Lita Nelson, who was part of the MIT miracle, she was the head of tech transfer for 30 years at MIT. She helped build that. Used to say, many collisions, minimal friction. So how do you as an organization start bringing people together at, coffees, a night for beer and wine or something where people can just mingle and talk? The next thing to remember is nothing happens without a sale. My dad taught me that. I'm a 6th generation entrepreneur. Yeah, nothing happens without a sale. So we have to understand that the company needs to make money. Money is not a dirty word. It's called for profit. That's why they are for profit. People in not for profits forget that for profits are supposed to make money. So you have to explain things in ways that make it clear how you can make money. As Milton Berle said, if opportunity doesn't knock, build a door. One of the problems with boundary spanning that we see here in Cyprus is nobody goes and knocks on the other person's door. I have companies that do generic pharmaceuticals who don't walk down the street in the same city, well, drive down the street in the same city, they're not that close, but drive down, 10 minutes in the same city, you go talk to a research institute that's involved in repurposing off-patent drugs for hematological purposes. It would seem like that's a match made in heaven, but neither one of them will pick up the phone to call the other. So if you're in a support organization, maybe you should be picking up the phone and inviting them both out for coffee so they can talk. And finally, my favorite Chinese fortune cookie says, a well-defined imagination is the source of great deeds. I have no idea how I got that fortune. It's like, usually it's like, you like Chinese food and, you will meet happiness today. But I got this one about well-defined imagination. And my point is simply this. We know how to make this stuff work. The tech transfer stuff, to cut a deal, to manipulate or to not manipulate, to navigate rather our way through the bureaucracy of a university, to work with companies. We just don't do it. And part of the reason we don't do it is we don't teach people how to do it and how to think about it. As an American coming to Cyprus, people tell me you can't do spin outs here because faculty aren't allowed to go off and start a company. I'm like, well, you can still do a spin out. Then the postdoc goes start the company and the faculty member gets a consulting contract. I mean, what does it mean to start a company? You have control and you get revenue. That's all stock is, control and revenue. So you start focusing down on what the pieces that you want to have, and you can make things happen. Similarly, if you're trying to move some technology, what are we focusing on? A set of capabilities defined in the claims that allow us to do certain activities that create certain functionalities that can be used to solve problems in a company. Similarly, if we're doing know-how and trade secret, what are we talking about? Usually it's consulting contract. That's the way we do tech transfer. Most tech transfer, by the way, from universities begins with consulting contracts, moves on to sponsored research, and then actually licensing comes out at the end. Otherwise, it's faculty or students starting a company and doing a license to go with the company that they started. So again, it's coming back to this, let's focus on the basics. Let's remember we gotta move people. Let's remember what the value of the technology is and the value of the IP is. Clearly, the IP as a tool can be very valuable in a lot of ways. It gives you that monopoly position and other things. And at the end of the day, we just gotta get out there and rub shoulders with people because they're not gonna come together otherwise. And none of this will happen without people who want to make it happen. So that's my 20 seconds of reality in tech transfer and IP, and I would be glad to answer any questions anybody has.
Well, thank you very much, Leah. Very, let's say, practical and comprehensive presentation. And it was great to listen to this, let's say, US Cyprus perspective. But related to this, well, your background and your experience in US, what are, in your opinion, the main differences between the technology transfer panorama in US, what you see in Cyprus, and what you see also in European Union, because the European Union has a lot of projects for, let's say, supporting technology transfer.
So I would say, I guess my core differentiation is this. The EU overall, with the exception of Britain and Ireland, and a little bit in Germany, which I'm familiar with. I don't know France as well, so I can't speak to France. But in general, the EU is about 20 years behind where we are in the US. It reminds me very much of my early days when I was a registered federal lobbyist putting in place some of the legislation that allowed all this to happen in the US. And the reason it reminds me of that is people know how to talk the talk, but they haven't focused on the meat and potatoes of walking the walk. And so you read the European guidelines and they all sound great, but there's no support for programs targeting postdocs to prepare them to move with technology. There are no support, there's the programs that deal with knowledge valorization are different than the programs that deal with companies. There's no boundary spanning in the structure. The other core difference, and this is a very important difference for me, this is just my view again. In the US, when you look at how the research agencies function, they have some staff that's permanent, but a lot of the research agencies function with what we call rotators. That is academics or people from industry that come in and they work for 3 years and then they go back. And in those 3 years, they bring fresh ideas into the agency because they've been out in the community.
Yeah.
And they also bring knowledge of how to work the agency back to the communities that they're in. And it's sort of this cycling of people that I don't see as much in the EU. So for example, in my agency here in Cyprus, I have people who've been here 30, 40 years, and they're good people. There's nothing wrong with it, but they're not in contact with what's happening out there in the real world. They're in contact with how we do things at RIF. Now, there's a plus to that. They get efficient at processing paper, but if you're trying to drive culture change and innovation, you need to keep on bumping up against the reality. It's why I travel and work various places so I don't get stale. Every place teaches you something new and said, and you're like, oh yeah, well, I was drinking my own Kool-Aid there. So it forces you to rethink things. So that's one change. The second change is, and I can't speak for all of Europe on this, but there's a different attitude towards failure. It's okay to fail in the US. I mean, you don't want to fail, but if you fail, you pick yourself back up and you think about how you do it better next time and you go off and you do it. So that's a factor. It's less okay in a place like Cyprus, which is a small country. Everybody knows everybody, and it gets embarrassing if you fail. Now, whether this is true in Germany or Italy, I don't know. And I say the third thing is the bureaucracy is much less rigid in the US. It's, you can move through things much faster. We recently incorporated in Italy. We set up a branch office in Italy. And it was tedious, to say the least, to do it. And time consuming, because you gotta get everything notarized and You know, if you're in the US, you want to send something in the US, you go down to the Secretary of State's office, and then that day you go back and you're done. So that contributes to this kind of entrepreneurial, more flexible kind of approach. So that's the key thing, this flexible versus inflexibility or ossification in the system. It's worse than it used to be in the US, I will say that.
Okay. I still encourage all participants to ask questions to take this opportunity to ask questions to Leah, because this is very a very good circumstance to take some hints from her experience. While we wait for questions from the audience, Leah, according to my experience, there is if you liaise with universities, researchers, there is not real awareness about the difference where we used to say from titled IP rights and untitled IP rights. I mean, you know, patents, trademarks, designs on one side, and you know, know-how and trade secrets on the other side. And sometimes, you know, they are put on the same level, and sometimes they are not, because then if we speak about, you know, even the investor that should carry out a due diligence or an assessment, gives to these rights a different weight. What do you think about that?
So I come back to what's the business you're in, where you're trying to go, and what makes the most sense. I am not a big proponent of patenting for the sake of patents. I think it is wrong to say more patents means more economic development. Why do I say that? If you're in deep tech, it's going to take you 5-10 years to develop something. Patents critical, because you're not going to put large amounts of money in unless you're sure you can exploit it downstream. If you're in software, first of all, it's hard to get a patent. And secondly, it's got a lifespan of 2-3 years. Typically, it's going to churn fast, a lot of software. So what's the value of the patent? Or I'll give you another example. I did a project years ago. I think it was for, I can't remember if it was a government lab or a company now. But anyways, this guy had developed a new way to manufacture urea, a lot cheaper. And it was being protected by trade secret, and he wanted to get a patent, and we had to discourage him from getting a patent. And we're like, why are you discouraging me? And the reason was, if somebody in China or someplace else reads that patent, what's to stop them from copying it and not paying anything? Because it's urea. There's no marker in the urea that says it was made with this process. So the patent does you no good. You're better off licensing it as trade secret. That person uses it, they get a cost advantage in the marketplace, whatever. They either make more money or sell cheaper. So you have to think about the context in which the IP is being used.
And what is in your opinion, what are the sectors in which, you know, in the future scenarios about technology transfer? What are the leading sectors in the next 20 years? What do you see?
So I always come back to this. I tell people what's a leading sector is going to be where there's a real problem. So if you have a better way to solve a real problem, that will be a leading sector. I remember when I first went to Asia, oh God, you know, 30, 40 years ago, and started working in Asia. I was working for Osaka, I think it was, some Japanese, I think it was that, either that or University of Tokyo. And I had a researcher come with a skin whitener. And skin whiteners were very big. And, you know, yeah, you could make money on it. And yeah, it was kind of, you know, it was easy enough to license, but it was sort of like, okay, next, who cares? There's 20,000 other ways of lightning skin out there, and you have the next greatest. If you came up with a new way to desalinate that was super energy efficient, a new kind of membrane, that was self-cleaning and whatever, just it deteriorated the salt so it wasn't an issue or whatever, it fell down, something like that, I don't know. But you could see that being incredibly valuable because a lot of countries are getting desertified and don't have water. And that's a big fear. If you come up with a better way of, well, I'll give you an example. We know reefs are bleaching out from global climate change. Some researchers down at CMMI, the Center for Marine and Maritime Innovation, it's an EU Center of Excellence here in Cyprus, have developed a way of manufacturing out of cement by printing the giant 3D printers. They print reefs that look exactly like the reef there. The really exciting thing, so you can drop it down on the reef that's being deteriorated because all the coral has died. The real exciting thing is they can also put in the cement as they're mixing it, chemicals that will feed the good fish you want and the good marine animals you want, and deter that are noxious to those you don't want, who are predator species. So it helps for the rejuvenation of the reef. Now, that's a very exciting technology, and it not only would work around places like Cyprus or Australia where you have bleaching problems, but I come from the Pacific Northwest in the USA. We have a problem that every time you fix aging infrastructure that's in the water, it affects a plant called eelgrass. So I say to these guys, could I modify your mix in such a way as to mix flexible enough that I can put seeds for eelgrass and nutrients for eelgrass so that when you pour the concrete for the pillar, I can feed the eelgrass and rejuvenate the eelgrass faster, which reduces the environmental impact, and hence I can rebuild infrastructure faster and cheaper. And they're like, yeah, you can do that. Okay, so that's a platform technology now. Very exciting. So what am I looking for? Platform technologies address real problems and have a market that exists today, not somewhere in the future. Because those are the ones that will move most quickly.
Thank you, Leah. Thank you. Final question, just to go back to the title of our webinar. Any tip for universities, researchers, even SMEs, on how to better manage intellectual property in connection with technology transfer? Final tips, takeaway messages.
I have a blog that I write often on LinkedIn. And I have a series of 6 or 7 articles that I put in there on how to think about reaching out to industry. And in a nutshell, what it says is this. Step 1, walk the halls in your university. Figure out what excites people, what they want to be doing, because it's hard to get, if the researcher isn't involved, you're not going to be as successful at tech transfer. Figure out what excites them, look at that, categorize it in some way. Then look at what industry in your area needs. And think about how you think global, or rather think local but act global. There is a problem wherever you are living in Italy, or I see somebody there from Norway, wherever you are, there are problems that you have, and you are not the only people in the world with those problems. But if you can demonstrate you can solve that problem with innovation, and the IP and the tech transfer is about creating innovation in the market. If you can solve that problem locally, that means there's a global market for it. So build the local partnerships, because if you build the local partnerships, you accomplish 2 things. Number 1 is you start moving technology. And once you start, you get some traction. And number 2, remember who the taxpayers are who are supporting all of this. So if you're helping the companies in your area or in your country who are supporting your university, because they're being taxed, you're more likely to have a robust support for research at the university as well. The flip side comes from the company side. The company needs to sit around and look at itself honestly and say, where are we in 10 or 20 years? Not next year or the year after, but 5, 10, 20 years. How do we become a global leader in what we want to do, or a Norwegian leader in what we want to do? This is called gap analysis, if you've heard of that. Where am I today? Where do I want to be? How do I go from point A to point B? When you do the gap analysis, you begin to identify things that you need to have. If it is far enough out, it's not, I need this next week, I need this next year, but it's, I need this in 2-3 years, or that kind of framework. Then go to the university and see who's around and talk to them and visit them, take them out for coffee. I'm big on taking people out for coffee. And talk to them and say, here's my problem, any ideas? Oh, really good idea. I might be willing to fund a master's student or a PhD student, or a little postdoc project on that if I could get the rights to it.
Thank you very much, Leah. Very, very interesting perspective. So we are approaching the end of our webinar. You still have 1 minute for your questions. If not, just an information that can be useful for you. So probably you must be aware that UIPO could relaunch the SME fund supporting SMEs in the next months. So stay tuned on the UIPO website. And I would like also to raise your attention on this IP management clinic for SMEs. That is a program of WIPO. You can find all information on WIPO website. It is a 4-month program that supports innovative companies in formulating IP strategies based on their business plan and intangible assets portfolio. So if you are an SME or you are an intermediary, you can liaise with WIPO and have access to this program, or request to partner with WIPO for offering SMEs this service. So I don't see any other questions. So Leah, thank you very much. It was a very valuable participation and presentation. So your contribution was great, and thank you everybody for your attention. So with this last webinar, the IP for SME project ends. Of course, you can drop us an email if you have any additional questions. We will involve our speakers again. In the negative, I hope that we see for other ISME initiatives. Thank you very much, Leah. Thank you, everybody.
Let me just emphasize to everybody, I'm more than happy to continue the conversation. You know, feel free to drop me a line, and we'll figure out how to continue the conversation or meet in person when one or the other of us are traveling. It's always lovely here in the winter. Don't come in the middle of the summer. That's all I can say.
And then, of course, you can contact Leah on LinkedIn, or so you can find her there. Thank you very much, and have a nice day. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.